I am Don Tess, better known as the Dawn of Beer.
And I'm Em Sauter, better known as Pints and Panels.
Welcome to episode 73 of the All About Beer podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk with leading experts and take a deep dive into one topic in beer. This week on the show, we're going to talk about the economics of beer. Why is beer so fucking expensive? But first, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And you know what's not expensive? Supporting this show. Please visit allaboutbeer.com/support to support this show and others. Have you noticed that beer has gotten more expensive?
I have indeed. There's a brewery near my house, very good brewery.
Yes.
Enjoyable. Double IPA, 12-ounce pour, $9.
Yeah.
$9. And then you go into New York City or Boston, beer starts at $10, $11. Feels like you're going to like a baseball game every time you go to a bar. I don't know. Is it different in Canada? What's it like there?
No, I think we're seeing the same thing. And I see quite a bit of variability, more variability now than I did a few years ago, I think. So I think certainly I've heard people making choices about like what tap room they're going to because that place is too expensive now. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is.
We're going to find out why all of this is happening. But first, if you would like to help support the All About Beer podcast, please reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of supporting this show, here is a word from our sponsors.
To you by Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Nevada Brewing Company, still family-owned, operated, and argued over.
New York's most exciting craft beverage destinations, head to Westchester County in the scenic Hudson Valley, where more than 23 breweries, distilleries, and cideries are pouring up local flavors in every glass. Get started with the Westchester County Craft Beverage Trail free digital passport that makes exploring easy, and no app download is required. Just check in at participating locations to earn points and prizes, all while enjoying a taste. Use the passport to tag your favorites and discover new hop spots like Broken Bow Brewery in Tuckahoe, Captain Lawrence Brewing Company in Elmsford, Hardscrabble Cider in North Salem, and River Outpost Brewing Company in Peekskill, and many more. Ariana, Callista, Tradition, Mule Melon, Select. RahrBSG sources these German hop varieties and more directly from German growers through their cooperative organization, HVG. Founded in 1953, HVG has grown to be one of the most important hop suppliers worldwide. In addition to supplying a large part of the German hop crop to brewers worldwide, HVG also processes hops into pellets, extract, and other hop products. Where would beer be without HVG? For the best selection, contact RahrBSG.
Audra Gezunas is a fractional CFO for the craft beverage industry, having worked with over 350 entities over the past decade. She is the owner of Brewed for Her Ledger, as well as an owner of Dissolver in Asheville, North Carolina. Prior to owning her own consultancy, she served as Dogfish Head Craft Brewery's controller from 2009 to 2010, and Mother Earth Brewing's chief financial officer from 2011 to 2014. She has been working exclusively in craft beverage for almost 20 years, joined the Brewers Association's Finance Committee in January 2020, and currently serves as the treasurer for the Brewers Association's Board of Directors. Audra is a graduate from the Keenan Flagler 1 MBA program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and possesses over a decade and a half of experience in senior leadership roles in craft brewing, manufacturing, services, not-profits, and startups. She earned her undergraduate degree in accounting and business management, double major, from Loras College in 1997. Her passions include homebrewing, mobile marketing, crafting stories from numbers, and paying it forward. Crafting stories from numbers. That's so interesting. Welcome back to the show, Audra.
Oh, it's so good to be back. Thank you for having me back.
We are happy. We would do it like we would have you on every day if we could, every episode.
This is true.
Okay, so I have seen consumers complaining on social media. I've seen this for sure, that when a brewery charges, for example, $7 for a beer, they'll go, "That's ridiculous. Why brewery? They must be making $6 of profit on that $7 beer." Now, obviously, this breaks down differently in each state, but hypothetically, and let's not use
Mhm.
$7 since that's not a round number, but let's say for $10, how much money of that $10 goes to a brewery versus taxes or distributor? Like kind of how does that break down?
Sure. So we can look at the beer that's going to the customer through the distributor. We also have breweries that can self-distribute and they can recognize that margin. And then we have the pints that we have in the tap room that
Right.
are getting poured directly off the wall. So if we look at it from a larger, like 30,000 foot view perspective, typically the distributor is taking 22 to 30%. They want to make 22 to 30% margin off of you. So
Okay.
if we take another step backwards, it's really important to distinguish between margin and markup. Margin and markup are often confused.
Oh,
And when we talk about margin, it's really sales minus cost of goods. And that's what we all know as gross margin. And versus markup, that's the amount of which by the cost of a product is increased in order to derive the overall selling price. So when you're talking about $100, for example, let's say we're selling something for $100 and it cost us $70 to produce it, our margin is $30, right? Or
yeah.
30%. So if that what does that translate to the markup side? Okay, so that's a markup of $30 from the $70 cost, yielding a $100 price. And so if you take that markup of $30 divided by the $70 cost, the markup is 42.9%. So the
Right.
margin is 30%, the markup is 43%. And a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. So that's the first thing I kind of wanted to set
Okay.
straight. So the distributor wants to make 22 to 30% margin on what it is that they're selling. So that's less than what you're going to be able to take in terms of price from the top line. And then that's the distributor. And then the retail also wants a retailer typically places about a 25%, I'm going to say on average, markup on what they purchase from the distributor. So you have two layers of the
Okay.
onion you have to kind of pull back if you have a particular target price that you want the consumer to be paying on the shelf. And so that typically cuts about 30% off the top line for a brewery to begin with. That's 30% easily that
Hmm.
goes into
Sounds
the
like it should be more
distribution.
than like sounds like maybe even more
It
than
could
that, like
be.
35.
I mean, it could be. Yeah, it
Yeah.
could
Okay.
be. It definitely could be. It could be as high as 40. Like I've seen that
Okay.
also. Yeah, it is. So we lose that in terms of price. So it has nothing even to do with cost yet, but it does determine what our price realization is actually going to be. So then we have ingredients costs. Now we switch to the cost of goods sold. And the ingredients on average are going to cost, this is just raw materials, about 8.5 to 15% of the cost of the actual pint. So it's either let's say a 20-ounce pour. The ingredients are typically anywhere between 8.5% to about 15%. I try to limit my brewery partners to not spend more than 15% of what their selling price is going to be. So the tap
Okay.
tap price would be the most common thing. And then we have the labor component of the production of the beer. And of course, it's going to be higher for a smaller brewery that's producing less barrels than a larger brewery, and usually kind of work out a happy medium there. But I try to keep the labor component to be under 38% of the total cost. And then we have packaging if you are putting the beer through distribution or even selling it through the tap room. That can get pretty high, especially if you're small and using a mobile canner, because you are getting marked up your cost of the can, the label, the end, the lid, and then the fill price per case. That can get pretty expensive as well. Um, if you said, let's sell this case for an example for $36, $16.65 is about the average of what the cost is to have that product canned and it to be in a format for the consumer to buy. That's a lot.
That's like 40%,
It is.
roughly.
Yeah.
Holy.
Yeah. And I often find that breweries that are using mobile canners are making less than 10% margin.
Well,
Less
I just
total.
added it up.
Like,
I got I'm
yeah.
at 93% so far.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So there it is. And then the rest is excise tax. And that's going to depend on state to state. So with us having to pay federal on the level, let's say if we're going on a gallon basis, we're paying 11.2 cents per every gallon on the federal level. Then from the state level, it could be anywhere between 2 cents a gallon and $1.29 a gallon. Yay, state of Tennessee.
Wow.
Yeah, that goes on top of that. So what's left over is meant to be covering the overhead of the brewery for them to be able to keep their lights on, for them to be able to pay their insurance, for them to be able to provide jobs for the front of house and a space for the community to gather. It is expensive, and knowing what your break-even point is for your specific economic model is absolutely paramount, especially in the light of all the tariffs that are being implemented and price increases that happen swiftly. We want to be able to gauge where that's going to be coming from so that we can prepare for it. And yeah, that is why beer is so fucking expensive.
I don't even understand how the brewer affords to buy a cot that they sleep in the I'm just kidding.
They just sleep on the grain bags. You know that.
Those are comfortable, yeah.
They can be.
For those who don't know and didn't think about it, what is an excise tax?
Excise tax is a privilege tax that is paid to the respective departments of revenue by state and the Fed for producing a highly regulated controlled product. We deal with alcohol, and so it is excise tax on alcohol. It's lumped together often with firearms, tobacco, but it is a tax in that same category.
But in addition to excise, there are other government fees.
Oh my
that breweries
goodness.
have, like colas and all that sort of thing. Can you run through some of those?
So then there's also sales tax that you have to pay. That's going to be different from state to state as well. And we all have our withholding tax that we have to pay, all of our employment taxes, unemployment, withholding, federal and state level. Then there could be some municipalities have a hospitality or food and beverage tax that they impose. I know that Vermont has one, for example, and sometimes the city itself will have another like 2 to 3% tax that they put on because it is a particular type of industry. So food and beverage often and hospitality are often lumped together in that category. And that could just be on the city level as well. So that's an example. I mean, there's so many that, yeah. And I know New York also has their own kind of tiered system for taxes, but on a base level, everybody has to pay an excise tax, and 48 of the 50, I believe, states have to pay sales tax. I think, what else? It adds up to a lot, and you do have to look at it on a case by case basis. The greatest amount of variety that we see is on a state level. That's state excise tax, where Wyoming, for example, is 2 cents a gallon, and then Tennessee is all the way to $1.29 a gallon. So getting the efficiency out of your brew house is extremely important there, because that's the amount of beer that is going to be removed for consumption or sale. That is what is getting taxed. So as soon as you pull that from non-tax paid to tax paid, like it's either moving over to the tap room or it's going to be sold through distribution. That's when your tax is due. So oftentimes you're paying that tax well before you've received the money in the door from the wholesaler, because they could be sitting on your bill for 30 days before they pay it. So cash flow is like, that's the name of the game.
Yeah.
And then distributors are chasing down checks from package stores or liquor stores for certain things as well. So there's just this like constant cash flow situation in the three-tier system that I don't think a lot of people think about.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, we need to know that and have a really great handle on it in order for us to time our ingredients purchases, our raw materials purchase, our packaging. That cash cycle can be as long as 90 days, and so much can happen within that 90 days. And whatever we can do, whatever methods we can take to shorten that cycle, the better for us. And because it steadies out our cash flow significantly.
You touched on this a little, but you talked about ingredients costing up to 15%. So can you break that down? So like in an average 16-ounce can of, let's say, 6% IPA, how much of that's going into like malt, even the water supply? Because if a town has to pay for city water or a brewery has to pay for city water,
Right.
are hops really the thing that's the most expensive, or is it something I'm forgetting?
There could be adjuncts too. Some brewers use honey and agave for candy sugar. Some of those adjuncts and those fruit purees can add up a lot as well. So that passion fruit, mango, a lot of those adjuncts can add up quickly also. I also see it from the perspective of last minute ingredients purchases. If you don't have the capability to buy in bulk, you are going to be paying a lot for a specialty ingredient that most order kind of just in time. And then the shipping costs that are associated with getting that specialty item oftentimes are as much, if not more, than the item itself. Like, and
Oh,
this applies to especially the smaller brewers, but I've seen that in practice a lot, and they're trying to manage through it, but sometimes they just forget, and so I'm trying to give them kind of a top tier limit on how they should price, well, sorry, get the gauge of their costs together. So if we're splitting it between the three kind of categories of malt and hops and adjuncts, usually hops takes a larger cost. Also, depending on the type of hop, if you're brewing with cryo hops, it's not going to be as expensive necessarily as T90 and the amount. And then you have a greater amount of efficiency, less loss because of the type of hop and using extracts, for example. Like you're gonna have a lot less loss at the end of the day, and therefore your efficiency is higher. It's it's those specialty malts, the specialty hops, and these adjuncts, depending on where they fit, that those are going to be the highest percentage of that cost.
So that's
cool.
why like a fruited sour would be more expensive than, let's say, a Pilsner. Even though Pilsners take much
Yes.
longer to make, you need these like purees and other stuffs that are expensive.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And oftentimes those beers are also using a specific yeast strain that cannot be propagated, repropped, and used in another batch of beer. So they're buying the yeast for that specific beer, not propping the yeast up, just buying it over again. That can get really expensive too. Yeast can.
Mm.
And on a batch basis, I have a brewery that I just work with in New England, and their yeast cost as a percentage of a total cost for their beer was as high as their hop profile. And
What?
Wow.
yes, because they're not repitching at all. They're just using that yeast strain for that particular batch. It's a 5 barrel batch, and and then they just buy the yeast all over again. So yeah, the yeast can get sneaky on you too if you're not managing that cost. But I think a lot of this happens from the perspective that brewer isn't really analyzing their costs as much if they're making money elsewhere, or if they're all selling everything by pints. Like it covers enough of their uh, amount that they need to pay their bills with. And so they kind of lump it all together like, well, we have cash in our bank account, so we're okay. But they don't
Mm.
truly know how much a pint even cost them because nobody's ever broken it down at that level. They're so busy racing around doing day-to-day operations that they don't have time to sit back and be like, all right, well, if I look at my bill of materials and I'm rolling it up to this amount and I'm bringing X amount through the door that pays all of my labor, we're doing okay, right? And the losses are not really looked at. It's really when you start looking at projections, and if your costs, your ingredient costs are theoretically X and you keep sales flat, you should be able to say, all right, well, if I produce the same amount of barrels next year, we should yield this amount of revenue. And oftentimes when that sort of exercise is taken, that revenue number comes up to look and appear to be a lot higher. The projected amount, if you're keeping those beer sales flat, it ends up being a lot more than what has reality been over the past year. So the current year that we're looking at now, we're looking at projecting a year forward. If we're keeping the amounts that what we paid excise tax on flat, and the revenue is appearing higher in our projections, that means we have that much loss that we have to determine where did that seep through our operation. Was it on the production side or was it on the taproom side? And oftentimes it is on the taproom side. That beer that's stuck in lines, the comps, the missed pours, the taps that are just staying open for a period of time before the glass is even set under it. If you only have like 65% of each keg that is truly sold, you're losing a lot there. And so there's hidden costs that exist as well that people are finally spending more time investigating. And that's a lot of what I do too, is that I'm the one that's going to take that fine-tooth comb and I'm going to force you to look at all of these steps within your operation so that we can determine where those costs truly lie. But yeah, there's a lot of loss that occurs within, especially smaller operations.
To go back to that brewery,
Yes.
if they just repitched, wouldn't that also cost them time and labor? And
It would.
they would need the equipment to do that. Would it really save them long term? Absolutely, but would it really save them a lot of money?
It would for what they are trying to do. When we were looking at their long-term goals over the upcoming 3 years, they are looking to open a second location, and they are also looking at to get into a couple of other agreements within the area. And so it would, when you project out what they were looking to accomplish, it would save them enough money to be able to cover over that same time period the cost of a more refined piece of equipment and additional tanks. So there were 2 tanks, I think, that we could purchase with the yeast cost savings. But at this point, they didn't even have a microscope or any lab equipment, which doesn't cost much. You can, for a few $100s, you have a microscope, you get your slides and your methylene blue, and so that you could start looking at tests. And having a little, even a small like QA, QC kind of department or mini department worked into your standard operating procedures is going to go a long way. And I look at this on a case by case basis, of course, like is it worth it, for this amount? And maybe the dollar amount doesn't look like it's high, but as a percentage, it turns the break-even point a lot and enough for some other decisions to be made. And at the end of the day, you can't improve what you don't measure. So start by measuring and understanding how much each one of your costs are so that you can determine, okay, what can I change the most easily?
Yeah. Okay, what about time? Lagers take up tank time, barrel-aged beers take years to make. It's How do you put a dollar value on that?
I don't immediately, like if we took a Gantt chart and said, okay, if we're lagering this, there's an opportunity cost, right? So
Yeah.
if we're lagering all these beers versus all of these are going to be ales, like what's the faster turnaround time that we have? And can we turn all of that beer? Can we sell all of that beer? How much of that beer would be sold? And you can create formulas and little mini Excels either through on your own, or you could throw it into ChatGPT and have AI do some of that work for you. I've been playing with that a little bit as well recently, and it can come up with a range of opportunity cost. And then you determine, well, is this the right decision for us? Yes, this rice lager is a lot less expensive to make, but the residence time is twice. Is that worth it for us? Does it make sense for us? If we have all this capacity, if we have additional capacity, obviously that's like
Why
we want
not?
to,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't have a number on that
Okay.
specifically, but you come up with what the opportunity cost is. You discuss that with your leadership teams, whether it's one person or three, and determine whether it's worth it or not. It's
Okay.
like it's more of a case by case decision. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other cost inputs we have not asked about? Because we kind of talked about ingredients and labor and taxes and all that. Anything we didn't ask about?
Well, overhead, really understanding your overhead per barrel. So if you produced and sold no beer whatsoever for an entire month, what are those costs that you're going to incur and have to pay regardless? And then break it down on a per barrel level or a per gallon level so that you're looking at it from the perspective, your operation, you're looking at it from the perspective of, here are my raw materials per barrel, here's my labor per barrel, here's my overhead per barrel, and then set price on top of that with a minimum that you want to make. Just make sure that you're at least breaking even. But a lot of people ignore those. They're like so focused on setting price based on the recipe, and the raw materials and the labor and the production piece of it. But the overhead piece kind of gets pushed to the back or just ignored altogether when making those pricing decisions. And all of a sudden we run into a loss position or a break even, or we feel cash flow strapped because we haven't taken our overhead per barrel into account. So know what that is. Know what your occupancy costs are, your lease costs, which includes your property insurance and your property tax. All of that should be, in a healthy range for the size operation that you have. And if you're spending money on music, make sure that it makes sense that you're bringing in these events, it's wonderful to support your local community. And I don't ever argue against that, but understand what those kind of extracurricular events are bringing in, to make sure you're bringing in the right events. Taproom experience is such a big focus that we need to continue to place importance and money and resources in. Just make sure that it is bringing in enough return that it makes sense to move forward in the same format.
Right. So everybody should cancel Taylor Swift coming into the tap room.
Yeah,
They can't
I'm sure you
afford
can
it.
find.
Can't afford it.
I'm sure there's a local band who loves to participate instead of Taylor Swift anyway. So yeah.
And we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Ready to taste your way through one of New York's most exciting craft beverage destinations? Head to Westchester County in the scenic Hudson Valley, where more than 23 breweries, distilleries, and cideries are pouring up local flavors in every glass. Get started with the Westchester County Craft Beverage Trail free digital passport that makes exploring easy, and no app download is required. Just check in at participating locations to earn points and prizes, all while enjoying a taste. Use the passport to tag your favorites and discover new hop spots like Broken Bow Brewery in Tuckahoe, Captain Lawrence Brewing Company in Elmsford, Hardscrabble Cider in North Salem, and River Outpost Brewing Company in Peekskill, and many more.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family-owned, operated, and argued over.
Need ingredients and supplies that deliver consistent, high-quality beer? RahrBSG has you covered. From hops to malt to yeast to unbeatable customer service, they are dedicated to your success. RahrBSG, ingredients for greatness.
Okay, so let's shift gears here. There's
Sure.
been a lot of talk about inflation generally and
Yes.
tariffs
Mhm.
specifically. In the past 5 years, how much have costs increased, and how might tariffs make this worse or better? Oh.
I mean, I can't find a case that it's going to be better, so to speak. I would say on average, the raw materials prices have gone up about 15 to 20%. I haven't seen it go much higher than that. It kind of ebbs and flows. So we had some prices go up, costs go up for us, and then they come sort of a little bit back down, or they fluctuate, like a lot of hops prices do on the open market. If you don't have a contract, if you don't have a malt contract, you don't have a hops contract, you're paying whatever the market is telling you you need to pay. And so that creates a lot of volatility as well. When I look at projections and costs, and I'm looking at a particular brewery that I've done over the last 5 years, and I look at how much materials cost, it's just been overall about 15, 20. But that's over the period and span of 5 years. These tariffs can change that overnight. Like you're going to have a 15, 25% increase on malt. Oh my goodness. Like who's going to eat that? Like if the brewery's already making such very little margin, it has to either come and be recovered in terms of price to the consumer, or something else has to go. And it's a painful decision that needs to be made, and it has to be done with a lot of thought. And it's or you change your recipes. You have to find a different
Mm.
supplier. So a lot of that Canadian malt that a lot of our folks use, like, do we even have the supply of something equivalent or similar of that in the United States? That goes up. And then cans are from various countries as well. I mean, I also think of Mexico a lot. This is stuff that gets turned on overnight, and that, like, having a 15% cost increase over the course of 5 years versus over the short term period, it just creates a lot greater amount of volatility. We can plan more when it's gradual. When we can't plan is when we have to develop these financial emergency plans to determine what our steps are going to be should the situation be X or Y or Z. So it is a delicate conversation. It is a difficult conversation. Having a six pack that goes up from $12.99 to $18.99 overnight is shocking.
Right,
And
because if they increase the price at the brewery, then as you said,
yeah,
that it increases percentage wise
it
because of the
does.
markups. But yeah, okay, I got you. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
No, 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 it's okay. It over a period of 5 years, when you recognize that some increases are going up, there gradual, it's we see what's happening in the overall market with inflation. We kind of expect it over time, but an overnight price shift like that it's difficult. But does the brewery is the brewery going to take that immediately and take that hit? Like, a lot of us just can't afford to have that and be put in that situation, because that means our people are going to get paid not necessarily what we want them to get paid, and that just hurts us as an industry. I it's Yeah, it's a tough
Uh,
and complicated conversation for sure, but
yeah.
it can be managed.
Well,
That's
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of, I posted a lot about tariffs on my Instagram, and a lot of people would just go buy American. Is
And
there,
you can't
and that's
sometimes.
what, so, I mean, but why couldn't breweries just I know why they can't, but why couldn't breweries just source locally, you know?
They don't have the soil, they don't have the weather conditions and the climate to be able to grow some of these materials and ingredients. I can't grow Idaho hops in this part of North Carolina because the soil conditions are different. The sun exposure is different. There's We have to take all of that into account, and we don't have the supply for that. especially to be turned on overnight. We know that hops take multiple years before you even have a flower that you can use. It could push us for innovation for sure, but even that isn't an overnight solution, and there's going to be a disruption in the supply chain as we're starting to experience. So it's the difference in the climate conditions. We don't have the acreage set aside for it. It takes time to transition from one type of crop into another. We have to invest within the soil conditions themselves to improve them. There's so much, like when we'd have to bring everything and source that within the United States. We don't have the supply. We just don't.
Yeah.
What about we can not talk about tariffs now. That's totally fine.
Yeah, I'm good with
I'm
that.
good. I'm good. What do you think of, in other places in the world, the excise tax is based on alcohol level, like most places in the world, like the UK. What do you think about people who think lower alcohol beer should be cheaper? And then there's also like, why are prices more or less the same regardless of ABV? And then what about NA beer? I mean, there's a lot of craft NA beer out there now that's $12 a six pack, and it's NA. So why is that the same price? Is it just go back to raw materials or?
I'm not sure. It could be. I don't I don't spend as much time on the NA side of things because the raw materials price is going to be roughly the same, but you have the process within the brewing process to ensure that the alcohol is removed or just doesn't happen. That I don't, yeah, that's a good question. Because there's so many ways that we could dissect this. So for example, I came back from Belgium just now, and over the last week and a half, I've had lambics and gooses, that have been aged for years. We have 3 different years that have been wound together, and I could get a glass of that in a bottle. They serve it in the bottle, a specialty glassware for €3. And
Ooh.
we're not going to find that here in
No,
the
we're not.
United States. No. But the labor component is really low there. You have one owner, they may have an assistant, and that is all of the labor that they have. And they put this beer in barrels. They only brew between November and March. And the rest of the time, it's just aging in barrels, and they're spending time with the customers. So
It's because they're not paying for yeast.
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
But yeah, there's that was a shock. I didn't realize it was that inexpensive to, like, the whole week, regardless of where we went and how much care had been put into the product. It was still not as expensive, but the labor is a lot different over there from Belgium, just seeing who was involved with the operation, how they work, how they're paid. But that's just a different structure overall. And wages, that's going to be a talk from country to country. It's a craft product. Yeah, it's a craft. Yes, but it's still a craft product. Like, the labor costs are going to be still the same because you're still taking it through the same brewing process. The alcohol level can change, yes, but you want to stay true to style. I'll pay as much for a lower ABV product as I do a higher ABV. I just had some session beers, some grisettes, and I paid just as much as I would for a double IPA. And I personally don't have a problem with it because I've been educated on the process and how much time it takes to brew, cellar, package. Like, all of that's still going to be the same. There shouldn't be that much of a difference in terms of pricing for that reason, because the same amount of labor is going into the whole overall process and the same level of care. So having pricing based on the amount of alcohol in a beer, it would make sense if those raw materials that are placed into that beer to give it that high ABV, because your malt bill is higher, or you have candy sugar that is added or other adjuncts that are added. That makes sense, but it's I just I see it as the same price regardless of level of ABV because the same amount of care has been placed into producing that particular product.
Right. And like you
Right.
said, overhead and all that, that remains the same.
It
So
remains the same,
Mhm.
right? Exactly. Most of these factors remain the same. So having ABV, like your alcohol level, be your price determinant, it just doesn't make much financial sense from my perspective. I'm sure cases can be made for it, but from my accounting brain and the accounting standpoint, no, it shouldn't be different.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about larger brands. So I have a story. So
Sure.
in 2004, I went to buy a 30 pack of Bud Heavy at my local Home D. Shout out to New York State people and their local Home Ds. And it was $22. I don't know why I remember this. And today, this is 21 years ago. So today in 2025, a 30 pack of Bud Heavy at the Total Wine near my house is exactly the same price. How do the larger breweries keep prices low for the same for 21 years? Is it because it's commodity versus craft, or is it engineering and food science, or
It's
what
probably a
do you think?
combination. Oh, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah.
No, I looked, I remembered this I have my college reunion this weekend, so I was thinking about college,
Mhm.
and I remembered buying that 30 rack. And I was like, I wonder how much it costs. And it's exactly the same. Granted, it's total, so they have everything's pretty much undercut, but still, like 21 years and it's still the same price. That's wild.
It is. I think that there's a lot of developments because the larger brewers can afford a lot of investment and developments within their technology and innovation. So their processing, their equipment for creating beer, I think that the investments in their fixed assets, that whole infrastructure have been a reason for it. And that that's I think a big reason for it. A lot more automation, a lot greater amount of automation and investments within that automation, the equipment itself, the processes, what they can do with the raw materials they've had. That's more on the technical side. I would say it's more from that perspective rather than anything else that I deal with. I've never worked for a larger brewery than Dogfish Head. I started out at Dogfish Head, and I have stayed with the smaller breweries to ensure that we can all survive and have a voice at the table. And so I don't have that sort of glimpse behind the curtain for a large multinational or conglomerate. One, I don't buy those products because I work for a craft side of the operation. I don't. But my guess and my most educated guess would be the investments that they've made within their automation and their processes themselves. They've gotten better at it. They've gotten leaner.
right.
Yeah.
I have kind of a two-part question that's sort of opposite sides of the coin, I guess.
Sure.
So, what you kind of touched upon, yeast as an example, but what do you want brewers to think about as easy, low-hanging fruit for them to become more economically efficient, things that you've seen breweries ignore, far too often or whatever. And then the flip side of that coin is from a consumer standpoint, what do you wish consumers understood about the cost of beer?
So if we start out with the consumer side, just understanding the entire process, the cross breakdown, really, I want them to understand that there's so many different layers that they don't see. There's all the different costs that roll into creating this beer that they are drinking. There's so much more than they can see. It would be great to have a graphic. If you want me to create one, I can. But that, and how much care is placed into this product to give you this consistent high quality in an experience, let's say a tap room, that cannot be replicated elsewhere. You, we provide a social setting. It is a third home for many people. And there's a lot of cost that goes into creating that and curating that. There's, it can certainly be quantified, but a lot of that cannot be replicated or imitated at a larger brewery or brewery that you just don't have any face time with. Having a beer with a beer owner that produced the beer and hearing their stories about what they've done and what their plans are for their next batch or why they produce this particular beer is worth so much. And there's a lot of cost that that particular owner that you're having the beer with is constantly calculating in his or her head, and it never goes away. We stay up all night and like hoping and ensuring that the market doesn't drop or doesn't turn away to different types of products that are not aligned with our values. It's there's just a lot that goes into it that we don't see. It's that tip of the iceberg that you see that the news talks about, and everything else kind of below the surface gets forgotten, or the just it's an education. It's an exercise in education that we have to have with the consumer. It's telling our story with the consumers that come into the tap rooms and have those pints of beer with us. On the brewer side of the coin, I'm going to come back to overhead because that is such an important component and something that we just still largely ignore. I was working with a brewery it was Midwest. I would call it Midwest. And they really had no idea that despite the fact that they were selling a greater amount of beer year over year, expanded their distribution footprint, they were finding themselves in a deeper amount of loss from year over year. So they sold more beer, but they made less. And it wasn't from the recipes and it wasn't the labor. And they were just completely at a loss. Like, how did things flip upside down? And it was that overhead per barrel spend. It wasn't just a lease amount going up. There were all these other components that were coming into that cost per barrel that were being ignored as they were having distributor conversations, as they were looking at, the bill of materials, talking to the brewer, and the brewer's like, yeah, I don't spend more than X per barrel. And that communication piece can largely get siloed from the rest of the operation. So the brewer thinks that they're doing a really good job because they're maintaining a certain cost per barrel, but all these other components that are coming into the overall cost, including overhead, are either ignored or never talked about. And so you have one department that thinks that it's doing well, while the rest of the leadership team is like, why are we losing money? Like, we're not spending that much more on labor. It's all these other kind of incremental costs that add up. So in a short format, I would love each brewery to be able to calculate what their overhead cost per barrel is. Know what that is and make sure that you include that within your pricing decisions.
Perfect. Awesome. I love it, Audra.
Yeah,
Before we let you go, can you please share your social media handle so people can keep up to date with what you're doing?
sure. I am Brewed for Her Ledger. I have my site. I don't really maintain too much of a Facebook presence, but you will find me at Instagram at Audra underscore my last name, Gaiziunas. And I bounce around a lot of different places, but if you just Google Audra and beer, you'll find me on the first page, and you'll find a lot of different ways that we can engage and interact. I do a lot of Star Wars cosplaying, so you'll see a lot of that in my social. I'll be
Yeah,
dressed up as
people
Leia
should
and
follow
Padme.
you just for that. Yes,
Yeah, the Star Wars cosplaying accountant.
I love it.
I love
Awesome.
it too. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Audra. This was great.
Thanks for having
Yes.
me. I appreciate it.
All
Thanks
right.
so much.
Cheers.
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 Okay, Em, so how do you feel about paying $10 for a beer now?
Now I get it. I get it. Like, you're not like with electricity being as expensive and then certain excise taxes, and then certain hop variety. Like I get, and then labor, people you got to pay the people to make the beer,
Yeah.
obviously.
And you need
Um,
wiggle room, if nothing
and
else,
you
right? Like,
and you need to make there's things that people are doing that aren't making them more money,
right.
There's like business, I think that's one thing that a lot of people are like, beer's so expensive, and then they forget it's like a business
Yeah.
where like people need to make money. I don't know. I just think that
Well,
it's
when was the last time you saw a brewery owner driving a Ferrari? Like, it's not like they're making.
there was that one guy,
Oh,
but
yeah.
he's gone now. But yeah, no, I mean it's it depends on the industry, but I mean, with the majority of breweries being small mom and pop shops, they've got to really think about with prices being raised, how much cans cost. If they don't have the mobile canning, that number's wild,
Yeah.
and a lot of places don't have room for a canning, and you got to hire someone full time to run the canner. I mean, I get it. I get it. I totally, I understand. Good thing where I live in Connecticut, we have really good happy hour. And so,
Okay.
dollar
Well,
off
pay for your
pints.
beer and still you have to tip. Don't forget to tip the staff
Always
well.
tip. For the love of God, tip those people. For the love of
Everyone,
God.
yes, everyone, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And again, to support this show, please visit allaboutbeer.com/support to support this show and others. If you have questions for the experts, please email podcast@allaboutbeer.com. That's also the email for feedback, suggestions, or to inquire about supporting this show through advertising. Em, how can people reach out to you?
I am at Pints and Panels on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Instagram, and my website is pintsandpanels.com. What about you, Don?
I am at the Dawn of Beer on X, Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram. And on Facebook, I am at the Beer Dawn. Don't ask why that one's different. And if you want to drop me an email, you can do so, dawn@thedawnofbeer.com. And once again, we want to remind you it only takes a few seconds to go into your favorite podcast app to like and subscribe to the show. That really, really helps us out, and it costs you nothing. Here is a final word from our sponsor.
Ariana, Callista, Tradition, Mule Melon, Select. RahrBSG sources these German hop varieties and more directly from German growers through their cooperative organization, HVG. Founded in 1953, HVG has grown to be one of the most important hop suppliers worldwide. In addition to supplying a large part of the German hop crop to brewers worldwide, HVG also processes hops into pellets, extract, and other hop products. Where would beer be without HVG? For the best selection, contact RahrBSG. Ready to taste your way through one of New York's most exciting craft beverage destinations? Head to Westchester County in the scenic Hudson Valley, where more than 23 breweries, distilleries, and cideries are pouring up local flavors in every glass. Get started with the Westchester County Craft Beverage Trail free digital passport that makes exploring easy, and no app download is required. Just check in at participating locations to earn points and prizes, all while enjoying a taste. Use the passport to tag your favorites and discover new hop spots like Broken Bow Brewery in Tuckahoe, Captain Lawrence Brewing Company in Elmsford, Hardscrabble Cider in North Salem, and River Outpost Brewing Company in Peekskill, and many more.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family-owned, operated, and argued over.
This show is produced by All About Beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com for articles, notes on this show and others, and to connect via the newsletter and social media. Cheers!
Cheers, everyone.
Money can buy many beers.